Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Quantifying the ROI of your eSign and PDF solution. Before we dive into today's presentation, let's take a few moments to run through a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session will approximately be 30 minutes. We've muted all participants to minimize the background noise, and there's a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We welcome you to ask questions by simply dropping them in the chat, where we'll cover them at the end of the webinar. And finally, a copy of the recorded session will be made available to you after the webinar. We are thrilled to have Clair, VP and Principal Analyst from Forrester, and Corrado Loreto, Associate Consultant at Forrester, join us today as our guest speakers for this session. My name is Stefan Gass. I'm the CMO of Nitro. I do want to make sure that you don't see this as a Nitro company or product session. What you will learn from Greg and Loreto are some of the key trends Forrester sees in automation and how to measure the total economic impact of your software investments. Here's an overview of what we'll cover today. Greg will take us through Forrester's key findings and guidance on automation. Corrado will present the role of total economic impact, and we'll use an applied example of that on Nitro. We'll then have some Q&A at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Greg.
Hey, thank you very much, Stefan. That was a great introduction. I'm happy to be here to talk about software and automation. That's pretty much what I do most of my time. We're going to talk. Let's just go to the first slide, and we'll get right into it. We are in uncertain economic times. What's interesting about this time is that no one seems to be able to nail exactly what's going to happen. So there's a lot of different opinions and concerns, but the bottom line is all of that creates some hesitancy and some changes in an automation roadmap. Now, we talk at Forrester to buyers all the time. About 80% of our clients are companies and governments that buy technology, and they are shifting their psychology a bit. And this is what this graphic is intended to show. Basically, things that are losing momentum, as you might expect in a recession, are those that don't have very immediate or tangible ROI. They're softer costs in an organization. So companies during the intelligent automation period or the hyper automation period invested a lot in having central organizations, that could manage the guardrails around automation. Still very, very important. Just a little harder to justify those soft costs. Some of those assets are from those organizations are actually being put into the business, the execution assets, to get going on automation, which is critical for a time like this. And more strategic projects around process and task mining, they might be halted a little bit. But what's accelerating are things that can help with resilience. We saw in the pandemic, certainly the vulnerability of having too much dependence on tightly integrated supply chains. So there's a real inertia in business to, try to, create more vertical integration, have more control over the labor, over the technology that's important for their business continuity. So resilience is important. FinOps is an area that is really trying to get a rationalization of your expenditure on cloud technology. So this is less of a concern in great times when revenue is driving and profits are great. But in times like this, you want to basically the accountants get a little more jump in their step, and they're starting to look at the portfolio of assets and how to rationalize them. Now, low code is interesting, and some of the PDF tooling and other personal productivity tooling has all been moving towards really easy operation and business control, right? That's what low code means, that citizens, real, mere mortals, not professional developers, can automate and manage technology. So that's been an important, and that has gotten a lift because, companies aren't hiring a lot of new developers or new people. They're actually going in the opposite direction. So anyone who's still left, is going to have to develop some automation. So that's moving that. Now, if you look at the tactical progress, this just means these are automations that are very visible. It's digital transformation, which we've been talking about for quite a while. Those continue to be very, very important in this time. And that would include what we call intelligent automation, which includes RPA, digital process automation, PDF editing tools, electronic signature, authentication capabilities, all of these tools to really reduce manual labor, to reduce the amount of paper in an organization, whether it's the first mile or the last mile. That becomes a real strategic importance during times of uncertainty. I think I can go to the next slide. And this is, what we like to do at Forrester is create really confusing slides so that we can get to explain them. This is one of my favorites. This shows the 4 major process patterns that all companies have. So a process pattern can be a level 1, like sequential, one step after another. Or it can be a completely closed loop pattern where a machine or AI is actually controlling the entire process, like a self-driving vehicle. So these are different gradations of, of patterns. The point is that most of the processes today, 68%, are at this sequential or rules-driven, very transparent in understanding exactly what the automation is doing. That's basically workflow. And that's where e-signature, PDF editing, approval workflow, these are, basic notions of digital transformation, that are, as we saw in the previous slide, are very, very relevant and continue to be a growth area in companies. What companies are trying to do overall with all of the discussion about generative AI is try to move more processes to this top of this pyramid, where you actually have in non-deterministic technologies, probability and statistics and AI that's really driving more and more of the process. So that's where humans and machines might share authority at level 3. It's where so a set of documents might be developed and edited within PDF. It might go through a loan approval, but then it might go to a machine to actually do the scoring and the risk assessment. So that's moving an underwriting human element to a machine element. So that's where humans and machines start to share authority. So this is the folks of a lot of companies, particularly after the pandemic and with resilience being so important, is to get to more autonomy, more self-correcting type of systems and processes. So these are all wrapped up in this great march towards more automation, which is inevitable trend. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. We have a lot to cover with Corrado, so I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Greg. So let's dive into the TI that we developed for Nitro. Next slide. So we conducted an analysis called TI, Total Economic Impact. So essentially, TI is a Forrester's in-house business case methodology that we can use to evaluate how a solution enables its clients' goals. You can use it to really understand what's the the value the Nitro productivity platforms brings to your organization, the benefits you gain from using it, the cost, and how will the solution set you up for success in the future. And also we consider risk and flexibility, because your situation can be different from the one that we analyzed for this particular study. So it's a really proven framework that we use to justify and quantify investment in technology. And it's a repeatable methodology that Forrester has been applying for the last 20 years now across technology vendors. Next slide. So this particular study is based on real customers' feedback. So we spoke with IT professional from 4 enterprise organizations to understand, their experience across the customer journey, how they are now using the Nitro productivity platform, how they implemented the solution, and the benefits they are actually experiencing since then. We created then a composite organization, which is a fictional company aggregating the characteristics of the 4 organizations or the 4 enterprises we interviewed. In other words, we showcase the quantitative and qualitative aspects of the Nitro productivity platform that we captured from the interviews using this composite organization as a vessel, I would say. And the final study shows quotes and from the interviews and feedback that we got from Nitro's customers, creating a narrative that really goes hand in hand with numbers. Next slide. So this slide shows you an overview of the 4 enterprise organizations we interviewed. So these organizations come from a wide range of industries, as you can see, from financial services to food and beverage, and also a wide range of countries from the United Kingdom to New Zealand. All of them use the Nitro productivity platform for a variety of use cases, such as creating and signing insurance policies and certificates, or creating and signing long and complex legal documents that might require several signatures. All of them use the solution across different departments, such as HR, legal, procurement. Next slide. So the first question we asked interviews was, why Nitro? So what were the challenges that we're facing before investing in Nitro? In other words, what really drove the investment? So the first common issue was the high licensing cost of prior solutions. So many of them said that scaling the adoption of digital document workflows was actually not possible due to the prohibitive cost. And that means access was granted only to a subgroup of employees, which brings us to the second challenge. So many employees were still processing documents manually, namely, for example, printing and scanning and shipping documents manually, slowing down productivity. Interviews also told us that some of the solutions they used before Nitro were actually quite clunky, forcing the IT teams to address several IT help requests. And also some of the tech vendor really didn't make it easy for the organization to renew contracts or, for example, install security updates, forcing them to search for updates manually. We are talking about processes that could take days of work for the IT teams. And finally, interviews reported security concerns as employees with no access to those expensive solutions that I mentioned used to install unsafe freeware software without IT approval. One of the IT leaders that I talked to told me that he at some point found more than 400 unauthorized installations. Next slide. So now I'm going to introduce the fictional organization we created to illustrate the benefits and costs of using Nitro. So this organization is a document-heavy, multi-billion enterprise which employs 6,000 people. Before Nitro, it had a mix of digital and paper-based document workflows. The organization had digital tools before Nitro, but was actually struggling, as I said, to scale them because of high licensing costs. Nitro allowed the organization to scale the adoption of digital document workflows to 1,500 users by year 3. It uses Nitro productivity platform across multiple departments and use cases, and the organization process up to 300K documents per year with Nitro by year 3, and send more than 3,000 eSign requests with Nitro by year 3. Next slide. So here we have an overview of the benefits. We always try to pay, I would say, equal attention to quantified benefits, so something that we can actually translate into money terms, but also the qualitative benefits. So something that is not easy to put numbers on, or actually the customers that we interviewed didn't track. And I will go through them one by one now. Next slide. So the first quantifiable benefit, which is also, the one with the biggest impact in money terms, is time saved processing documents. So they save 15 minutes per PDF document edited with Nitro, as they now can create, edit, combine, and bookmark PDF documents in a really few clicks, and 20 minutes per eSign request, as they no longer need to print, sign, scan and ship documents manually. So the interview from the financial services organization told me that they can now bookmark a 400-page long document in just 1 minute with Nitro. Next slide. So the second one is the money saved on paper and postage. So Nitro helped the composite avoid almost 300K prints over 3 years. Also, as the eSign components of the Nitro productivity platform allow the organization to request signatures digitally, they no longer need to ship documents. Savings on total more than $20K on paper and postage. And the interview from the manufacturing organizations that I interviewed told me that they already reduced prints from 1 million to 300K thanks to Nitro. Next slide. So the third one is the benefit is the IT time saved thanks to Nitro productivity platform. So the composite reduced up to 70% time used to use, that the IT team used to spend processing IT help requests related to the clunky solutions that I mentioned, and also reduced up to 70% of IT time previously spent on processing security updates and contract renewals. The IT leader from the manufacturing organization told me that the prior solution was frequently actually targeted by hackers, and they needed to do so much patching. But the vendor wasn't proactively informing them about updates, so they were forced to search for updates manually and install many security updates. And so he considered Nitro much safer and almost zero touch management. Next slide. So the last quantifiable benefit is improved scalability of the digital document workflows. So the Nitro cost-effective licensing fees allow the composite organization to scale the adoption of document workflows to 50% more users than a similar plan with the prior provider. And one of the interviewees told me that Nitro allowed them to scale the adoption at 1/3 of the cost compared to the prior provider. Next slide. So as I said, we also paid attention to the unquantified benefits, and the IT leader from the manufacturing organization that I interviewed described them particularly well. So the first one is the improved customer service. So the IT leader told me, I know that I can always pick up the phone and reach out to Nitro if I need help. There's always someone there ready to answer questions. And he defined the prior provider as a really faceless organization instead. The second one is reduce environmental impact. So as I already mentioned, the manufacturing organization reduced prints from 1 million to 300,000. But also the Nitro Analytics platform lets them calculate the real impact of that reduction in terms of CO2 emissions and tree saved, for example. And the third one is still linked to the Nitro Analytics. So the IT leader told us that they with the analytics they can track how many pages are printed, how the employees are using the solution, which components are using the most, and then they can adjust the trainings accordingly. And this is particularly helpful when they acquire new businesses because Nitro helped them understand, for example, their printing habits. Next slide. Here we have a quick overview of the costs associated with investment in Nitro for the composite organization. The 3-year total cost present value is around $280,000, and costs are divided by 3 categories: licensing fees, implementation and training, and management of Nitro productivity platform. Next slide. So for the composite organization, the licensing fee started at $96 per user, decreasing to $84 in year 2 and 3. 106 hours spent at first for implementing the Nitro productivity platform and prepare initial trainings. And then the ongoing cost 4 hours per month overseeing access and addressing support requests, 2 hours for security updates, and then 4 hours per year analyzing usage data from the Nitro analytics. Of course, costs vary depending on some factors. For example, the total number of users, any discount based on volume, the scale and complexity of implementation, and of course, digital proficiency of end users. Next slide. So here we have the final summary of the financial model we developed for the composite organization. So the ROI, and this is a 3-year impact. So the ROI was 694%. The total benefits 2,022,000, and the net present value was 1.94 million. Sorry. One of the interviews from the engineering consulting firm told us that before Nitro, it was a real nightmare. They were supposed to, print documents, leave written markups with red pens, scan, send again. There was no digital backup of changes, but now with Nitro, it's way easier for them. Next slide. And that's my last slide. I will close with this quotation from one of the interviewees, which is a real good summary of the study we conducted. So they tested multiple alternatives, but they at some point realized that Nitro was ahead of the rest of the industry as an alternative to well-known solutions. And I will pass the ball to Stefan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Greg and Corrado. Fantastic presentation, good insight. We have time for a couple of questions, and I can read here a few in the chat. The first one is for Greg. Greg, our viewer has asked about the automation roadmap you shared in your first slide. Which quadrant does PDF and eSign sit in, and why?
Yeah, that would be the lower right quadrant. It's really wrapped in with those digital transformation tools that are listed there. It is about cost efficiency, cost containment, and so forth, which again is a very strong driver during economic uncertainty. So when you think of all the digital transformation tools, you think of workflow or business process management. You think of e-signature platforms, that allow you to get that last mile to electronic, so there is no wet signature, and you can have the best electronic evidence that you have with those, much better than in the paper world. Now accepted almost universally. The pandemic was a real boom to acceptance of electronic signature. Before the signature process, the creation and the editing of the PDF is a critical aspect of that as well. If you can't get to an electronic form of composition, then you're unlikely to have that entity absorbed into an e-signature platform to then go through the workflow for the signing ceremony and to get that last mile under wraps. That's a huge win, which companies really had to embrace significantly during the pandemic, because they really couldn't do it. You couldn't walk into an insurance agent and office and get something signed, right? You had to do it all remotely. So it's definitely in that cost containment quadrant at the lower right.
That makes good sense. Thanks, Greg. And then we have one more here for Corrado. Corrado, you covered a really interesting use case for Nitro Analytics. In the case of a customer who repeatedly has undergone a number of M&A situations, so merger acquisitions. Can you outline how Nitro Analytics helped those guys?
Yeah, sure. So the manufacturing organization that I interviewed said, actually, as you mentioned, that they acquire lots of companies across different regions. So each time they do so, they extend access to the Nitro productivity platform to the new employees, so to speak. So after a period of time, they gather data from the Nitro analytics platforms to understand how new employees are really using Nitro's features, and also understand how they're doing in terms of digital document workflows. Then that allows the organization to set up trainings accordingly, and it's really helpful because they can let's say standardize the work practice globally. And also the other point is around sustainability, as I mentioned before. So they told us they have quite aggressive target in terms of sustainability. With Nitro Analytics, they can understand printing habits of the new employees and try to keep the global company, including the new companies acquired, on track for the sustainability goals.
Thanks, Corrado. And I see we have a few more questions popping in here. But I think what we'll do, we are almost at time. We'll answer those in a follow-up to this webinar. So we certainly get back to all of you. With this, I really like to thank our guest speakers from Forrester, Greg and Corrado. Thank you very much for those insightful key points and presentations. Thanks so much to you, participants. And we hope you found this session insightful, and we'll connect with you soon again. Goodbye.